July 24th, 1943. The skies above Hamburg. Down below, the Third Reich's second-largest city is trying to sleep. 1 million people living in the shadow of total war. But inside the dark, humid cabins of German radar trucks parked along the coast, the war never sleeps. These men are the eyes of the Luftwaffe, watching glowing green cathode ray tubes for the telltale blips of incoming British bombers. Suddenly, the screen changes. It doesn't show a bomber. It doesn't show a squadron. The screen erupts. It explodes into a chaotic, meaningless snowstorm of light. Thousands of signals. Tens of thousands. It looks as if the entire Royal Air Force has suddenly materialized out of thin air. Panic tears through the command chain. Telephones ring in bunkers from Denmark to Berlin. The air raid sirens begin to wail, a mournful, rising mechanical scream echoing across the Elbe River. But here is the twist. The planes on the radar screen? Most of them aren't there. They are ghosts, phantoms. They are an illusion created by one of the most absurdly simple weapons in the history of warfare. There are no electronics involved, no secret codes. The German war machine, the most sophisticated air defense network the world has ever seen, is being blinded by strips of aluminum foil. This is the story of Operation Gomorrah. It is the story of how a team of British scientists turned Adolf Hitler's greatest strength into his fatal weakness. And it is the story of Window, the secret weapon that cost pennies to make, but changed the face of aerial warfare forever. To understand the genius of the solution, we must first understand the terror of the problem. Rewind 6 months to early 1943. For the young men of RAF Bomber Command, the war was becoming a mathematical impossibility. They were flying the heavies, Lancasters and Halifaxes, deep into hostile territory at night. In the early days of the war, darkness was a shield. You couldn't shoot what you couldn't see. But by 1943, the Nazis had stripped away that cloak. They had constructed an invisible wall across Western Europe called the Kammhuber Line. Named after General Joseph Kammhuber, this defense system was a marvel of German engineering, stretching from Denmark to the Swiss border. It was a seamless, integrated network of searchlights, anti-aircraft flak guns, and, most importantly, radar. The statistics from this period are chilling. Between March and July of 1943, Bomber Command was bleeding out. They lost over 1,000 aircraft. Let's put that into perspective. A Lancaster bomber carries a crew of 7. That is 7,000 young men. Navigators, pilots, gunners, gone. Shot down in flames or exploded in midair. On some raids, losses exceeded 10%. Since a tour of duty was 30 operations, the math was brutal. At that loss rate, a crew member had less than a 30% chance of surviving his tour. It wasn't a matter of if you would die, but when. Morale was teetering on the edge of collapse. The strategic bombing campaign, Britain's only way to strike back at the heart of Germany, was failing. Why were the Germans so effective? How were they finding bombers in the pitch black of a cloudy night? The Kammhuber line relied on 2 specific types of radar working in a deadly duet. First, the Freya. This was the Brute, a massive mattress-like antenna acting as an early warning system. It could see a bomber formation from over 120 kilometers away, alerting the Germans that the enemy was coming. Once detected, the target was handed off to the assassin, the Würzburg. The Würzburg radar was a smaller parabolic dish, terrifyingly accurate. It could pinpoint a single aircraft, determining altitude, speed, and bearing. This system powered ground-controlled interception. Imagine a dark room. The British bomber is a fly. The German radar operator is a man with a flashlight and a fly swatter. The radar told the German night fighters exactly where to go. These fighters, primarily Messerschmitt Bf-110s and Junkers Ju-88s, carried their own onboard radar called Liechtenstein. Ground controllers would guide the pilot right onto the bomber's tail. Turn left, Climb to 15,000 feet. Target is 2 kilometers ahead. They would close in, sometimes to within 50 meters, and unleash a torrent of cannon fire. The British crews often never saw them coming until the wing was on fire. In London, the mood was grim. Enter the Wizards, the scientists of British scientific intelligence. Leading the charge was Dr. Reginald Victor Jones, a physicist who viewed warfare as a series of problems waiting to be solved. Through captured equipment, interrogations, and signals intelligence, Jones pieced together the German defense. He knew the Würzburg radar operated on a specific frequency, 570 megahertz, with a wavelength of roughly 53 centimeters. Jones realized that the German strength, their absolute reliance on radar, was also a potential weakness. Radar works on a simple principle. Send out a radio wave, it bounces off a metal object, and the echo returns. The bigger the object, the bigger the echo. Jones asked a question that seems obvious only in hindsight. What if we gave them too many echoes? If the German system relied on precision tracking, what would happen if we flooded their screens with thousands of false targets? The answer came from Dr. Joan Curran, a brilliant Welsh physicist at the Telecommunications Research Establishment. While generals looked at maps, she looked at the laws of physics. She proposed a solution deceptively low-tech, based on the concept of the dipole. A strip of metal will reflect a radio wave perfectly if the strip is cut to exactly half the length of that wave. Since the German radar used a 53-centimeter wavelength, a strip of aluminum foil cut to roughly 27 centimeters would resonate. To the radar, that tiny strip wouldn't look like trash. It would flare up on the screen with the intensity of a massive bomber. Curran calculated that a bundle of these strips, weighing no more than a bag of sugar, could create a radar echo equivalent to a heavy aircraft. Drop thousands of them, and you create a blizzard of static. They called it window. It was cheap, lightweight, and effective. By late 1942, the weapon was ready, but then the order came down. Stop. The weapon was shelved, the secret locked away. Why? Fear. Churchill and his advisors were terrified of the boomerang effect. They knew the physics were universal. Once the RAF dropped the first bundle, the Luftwaffe would analyze it, realize what it was, and use it back against Britain. They feared German bombers would use window to blind the radar protecting London, bringing a second blitz. For months, the debate raged. Air Marshal Arthur "Bomber" Harris argued furiously, "We are losing the war in the air right now. We cannot worry about what might happen in 6 months. We need to survive tonight." On the other side, Air Defense refused to authorize it. So the technology sat in a dark room while the slaughter over Germany continued. The deadlock broke in the summer of 1943. Dr. Jones provided the crucial intelligence. The Luftwaffe was stretched too thin. Most of their bombers were tied up on the Eastern Front. Even if the Germans copied window, they lacked the planes to launch a new blitz on London. The threat was a bluff. In June, Harris presented the statistics to the Defense Committee. The Battle of the Ruhr had cost nearly 900 aircraft, 4,200 trained aircrew dead or captured. "We cannot continue like this," he told them. Churchill listened. On July 15, 1943, he made the call. Operation Gomorrah was a go. The target was Hamburg. The secret was out. As the sun set on July 24th, 791 heavy bombers roared down the runways of eastern England. Inside, navigators sat with stacks of paper-wrapped bundles. They were told it was anti-submarine gear to maintain secrecy. They were about to play the greatest practical joke in military history. And the punchline would be devastating. The North Sea is a black void below. High above, the bomber stream is a vibrating river of machinery. Inside the fuselages, the atmosphere is tense. This is usually where the searchlights snap on and the flak starts tearing the sky apart. But tonight is different. At a designated point, 15 minutes from the German coast, the order is given. Start shoveling. Beside the flare chutes, crew members grab the bundles of window. They snap the bindings and shove the aluminum strips into the slipstream. Instantaneously, thousands of tiny strips disperse, fluttering and twisting in the moonlight. They must do this every 60 seconds, like a metronome. If they keep the rhythm, they are invisible. Thousands of bundles fall, creating a continuous, shimmering corridor of aluminum suspended in the air. To the naked eye, it looks like sparkling dust. To the electromagnetic eye of the German radar, it looks like the apocalypse. Down at the Stade radar station, operator Obergefreiter Hartmann stares at his Freoscope. He's waiting for the usual neat line of blips. Suddenly, the screen flickers. A blip appears. Then 10. Then 100. The screen turns into a solid wall of light. Hartmann taps the glass, convinced the machine is broken. The blips are stationary or drifting with the wind, but the signal strength is massive. He calls his supervisor. "The equipment is malfunctioning. I'm getting interference." He isn't the only one. Across the entire Kammhuber line, the network is having a nervous breakdown. The Würzburg precision radars are useless. Operators try to lock onto a target, but the beam bounces off millions of aluminum strips. The needle swings wildly. Is the bomber at 10,000 feet or 15,000 feet? Is it a plane or a cloud of foil? In the command bunker, Colonel Hayo Hermann, a Luftwaffe tactical genius, listens to the chaos. Radio channels are filled with shouting. "I cannot track them. The screen is full of snow." Hermann tries to vector his night fighters, telling pilots to use their onboard Liechtenstein radar. But the pilots report the same thing: white screens. They are flying blind in a fog of electronic noise. The deadly dance of ground-controlled interception has turned into a game of blind man's buff. Back in the air, the RAF crews can't believe their luck. Veterans describe the feeling as eerie. They are over one of the Reich's most heavily defended cities, yet the guns are silent or firing randomly. Without radar, flak batteries revert to barrage fire, aiming blindly into the sky. It's a waste of ammunition. Searchlights sweep frantically, catching nothing but empty air. The pathfinders drop their target markers. Red and green flares drift down over the Hamburg docks. The main force follows. In 50 minutes, they drop 2,300 tons of bombs. The destruction is heavy, but the tactical victory is in the sky. On a raid of this magnitude, Harris expected to lose 50 aircraft, maybe 60. As dawn breaks over England, the count comes in. 12. Only 12 aircraft failed to return. A loss rate of 1.5%. It is a miracle. 80 crews who should have been dead are eating breakfast. Window worked. The invisible fortress has been breached. For the crews, it is a lifeline. But for the people of Hamburg, this was only the opening act. Operation Gomorrah was designed as a campaign, a relentless hammering to break a city's back. But the real horror arrived 3 days later, on the night of July 27th. Fate conspired against Hamburg. The city was in a heat wave. It hadn't rained for weeks. The timber in the medieval buildings of the working-class districts was bone dry. The first raid had blown out windows and roofs, turning thousands of buildings into chimneys waiting for a spark. That night, Bomber Command returned with 787 aircraft. Again, they brought window. Again, the German radar was blinded. The target mix was calculated by scientists. High explosives to smash water mains and block streets, followed by incendiaries, thousands of small stick bombs falling like rain, igniting the exposed timber. Within minutes, hundreds of fires merged. What happened next was a phenomenon meteorologists called the firestorm. When a fire becomes this massive, it creates its own weather system. The heat rose rapidly, creating a vacuum at ground level. To fill that vacuum, fresh air was sucked in from the surrounding countryside with hurricane force. Survivors described the sound not as a fire, but as a scream. Winds reached 150 miles per hour, blowing into the fire. Trees were uprooted. Rubble tumbled down streets. People trying to run were knocked off their feet and physically dragged into the heart of the inferno. Temperatures reached 800 degrees Celsius, 1400 degrees Fahrenheit. At that heat, reality breaks down. Asphalt streets bubbled, melted, and burst into flame. People running across the road got stuck in molten tar, trapped as the fire closed in. Those in shelters fared no better. The fire above sucked the oxygen out of the basements below. Families huddled in the dark simply fell asleep from carbon monoxide poisoning, or were baked alive as the heat radiated through concrete walls. The Hamburg Fire Department was helpless. Water mains were dry, telephone lines melted. They could only stand at the perimeter and watch the city die. The fire burned until there was nothing left to consume. When the sun rose on July 28th, a heavy, greasy cloud of smoke hung over northern Germany, visible for hundreds of miles. Pilots at 20,000 feet smelled burning flesh in their cockpits. On the ground, 8 square miles of the city were gone, not damaged, obliterated. The human cost was numbingly large. Approximately 40,000 people died in that single week, more than the total British civilians killed in the entire London Blitz. Hamburg was effectively removed from the war effort. 900,000 refugees fled. Industrial production ceased. When Hitler saw the photographs, he reportedly shook with rage. He had promised a fortress, but the fortress had fallen because of strips of aluminum foil. Operation Gomorrah validated Harris's brutal strategy, but it left a moral stain history still argues over. The scientists who created Window knew their invention saved hundreds of British airmen, but it also facilitated the deaths of 40,000 civilians. This is the terrible calculus of total war, a zero-sum game where a technological triumph for one side is a humanitarian catastrophe for the other. War is a pendulum. When one side invents a shield, the other invents a sharper sword. The Luftwaffe did not simply roll over. From the ashes of the Kammhuber line rose a desperate tactic proposed by Hi-Ho Hermann. Wilde Sau, wild boar. The concept was brutal. If the radar is blind, stop using it. Hermann ordered fighters to strip out their radar sets for speed. Ground control would simply broadcast a general area. The bombers are over Berlin. German fighters would fly to the city, wait for the British flares and fires to light up the clouds, and hunt visually. Silhouettes against the burning glow. It was a return to primitive dogfighting. Window could blind a radar screen, but it couldn't hide a bomber from the naked eye over an inferno. British losses began to creep up again. Simultaneously, German engineers rushed to develop radar filters based on the Doppler effect, distinguishing moving aircraft from the stationary floating chaff. It became a game of cat and mouse in the electromagnetic spectrum that continues to this day. The secret of Window was too good to keep. As Churchill predicted, once revealed, it proliferated instantly. By 1944, everyone used it. Americans dropped it in daylight raids. In the Pacific, B-29s dropped tons of aluminum, called rope, to blind Japanese radar. Even the Germans used their own version, Duppel, in their final raids on London. The irony was complete. The weapon Britain feared would destroy them was now standard issue for every air force on Earth. The era of clean air warfare was gone forever. Flash forward 80 years. Watch a modern F-35 Lightning roar overhead. Behind small panels in the fuselage are cartridges loaded with chaff. Window changed its name, but the principle remains. Modern chaff is cut from glass fibers coated in aluminum, thinner than a human hair. But its job is identical to Dr. Curran's foil, to create a cloud of confusion against radar-guided missiles. But the legacy of Gomorrah goes deeper. The trauma of 1943 birthed electronic warfare. Today, aircraft like the EA-18G Growler carry massive jamming pods, the spiritual successors to Window. Instead of foil, they blast digital noise, hacking enemy radar with ghost fleets. And then, the ultimate evolution, stealth. If Window was about creating too many reflections, stealth is about creating none. The B-2 Spirit and F-117 Nighthawk are designed to absorb radio waves. They are the anti-window. But both technologies exist because of the lesson learned over Hamburg. If you can be seen, you can be killed. If you visit the Imperial War Museum in London, you can find a display case tucked away near the Spitfires. Inside is a small bundle looking like Christmas tinsel, black paper and strips of dull aluminum. It looks like trash. Yet this is the mad radar trick, the weapon that neutralized a billion-dollar defense network, destroyed a great city, and brought thousands of young men home. Dr. Joan Curran lived a quiet life after the war, carrying the weight of the wizard war. She knew that science is a double-edged sword. Every shield can enable a slaughter. The story of Window reminds us that war is not just a contest of strength, but of the mind. The Germans had the guns and the tech, but they were beaten by an idea. They were beaten by physics. They were defeated by the realization that the most complex system in the world can be brought to its knees by a penny's worth of foil. In the end, the radar screens over Hamburg didn't lie. They showed exactly what was there: a cloud of metal. The error wasn't in the machine. It was in the men who believed technology made them invulnerable. As we look at our own world of cyber warfare and AI drones, the lesson of the aluminum strips still glitters in the dark. No wall is high enough. No shield is strong enough. And the next surprise is already waiting in a laboratory, ready to turn the world upside down.